For 15 years, DJ Bob has been your go-to source for pop culture, past and present. We eat, sleep, and breathe pop culture, just like you. He's interviewed countless fascinating people, from well-known names to everyday heroes.
DJ Bob connects with his guests on a personal level, exploring their stories, passions, and challenges.
He's not just interviewing, he's building a community of like-minded, inspiring, driven, and talented individuals.
Join DJ Bob as he delves into the world of entertainment and the conversations that matter on all levels. This is the DJ Bob Show. Roll it.
What can I say about our next guest? Carin Greenberg is a Peabody finalist, winner of 3 Daytime Emmys, 2 Annie Awards, a Writers Guild Award, as well as just a great person. We talk with her about a lot of her work in the children's television field, and this is kind of a nice little part 2 to our chat with Al Roker, because Carin developed Weather Hunters with Al. So it's a nice little bookend to that conversation. I hope you enjoy this chat. So the way I typically start these is, could you kind of give us a little bit of an elevator pitch of who you are and what you've done?
Sure. So I'm Carin Greenberg, and for the past 34 years, I have been a writer, story editor, developer, and producer of children's entertainment, primarily in television, although I've done some live shows. I've written books for kids. I've done some other things as well. I've worked in everything from live action to animation, preschool to tween. But my focus has really been on kids. And I've worked for my network. My career has kind of mirrored the evolution of children's entertainment in that I started out on broadcast television with the show Ghostwriter for PBS, and then moved into cable, working for Nickelodeon and Disney, and then moving into streaming with Amazon and Apple. And now come full circle. My most recent series, which is about to premiere in September, is on PBS Kids, but I've also done content for YouTube. And that's about the gist.
And something that struck me is that you've always been a fan of this content. I believe when we met, we were just talking about Sid and Marty Krofft and how
yes.
that impacted you and all these things. So when you finally got into this world of children's media, what did you think it was versus what it actually was when you got into the weeds of it?
I would say it's pretty much what I thought it would be. And that's probably because I grew up in a family, many members of whom worked in entertainment. So as a kid, I was an actress on television. My mother's an actress. My uncle and my dad produced TV game shows. So I spent a lot of time in TV studios and on sets and backstage. And I actually even auditioned for the electric company, the original.
Oh, wow.
So, I had been to Children's Television Workshop for an interview, for an audition. So I don't think I had any real preconceptions that turned out to be false. It was, if anything, because my family worked in entertainment and because I faced a lot of rejection as a child actress, I initially decided that I was not going to work in entertainment because I knew what it was like. And I tried to go to law school. I actually went to Georgetown for a year. And then I got there and started writing songs based on the cases we read and performing them in class. And ultimately dropping out of law school and realizing I may have tried to not work in entertainment, but the pull was too strong. So I So I think I went into it with my eyes open and knowing pretty much what to expect. And I think it ended up being pretty much what I expected.
Well, that's so great because, as you know, I've been doing this podcast for such a long time, and it's so interesting to hear how so many of these creatives don't have that intel. They just kind of fall into it versus you were kind of in that world before you were in that world professionally.
Yeah, if anything, I tried to not do it because I knew what it was like. But I just ultimately decided, I can't deny who I am and what it is I was put on earth to do. So I tried to avoid it, but I couldn't.
So I got to be honest, one of the questions that I always ask television writers is, was there anything that standards and practices read in your script that said you can't do or say that?
Oh, many times. If anything, I think we all end up internalizing S&P. And so you kind of know after many years of working on kid shows, you can't say that. They can't eat ice cream. That promotes, sugar consumption, and we're having a diabetes epidemic. Or, you can't model anything that's unsafe or anything what they call imitable acts, like anything a kid might imitate and get injured or worse. I'm trying to think of some specific things. There have been so many over the years that honestly, no one thing stands out other than, you have to kind of be a guardian of children's welfare when you write for kids. Obviously you want to entertain them, you want to educate them, but you also have to look out for their safety and always think about, would I want my child to do this if that's what something a character is doing? So you just have to be careful. And I think it's, for a good reason.
Yeah, because I've heard some like ridiculous stories about how there have been unintentional innuendo stuff and like just things like that. But honestly, it's better that they are so particular about these things than just letting it all fly by.
I think so. Although, I remember I was on a panel once at Comic-Con in New York, and one of my colleagues, I can't remember who it was, but they were working on a show, maybe it was for Nickelodeon, and they had written a really funny gag about, it was either a fish or a frog. It was either a water animal or an amphibian. Like it was definitely an animal that lives in water. And they got some note from Standards and Practices that character couldn't go in the water because of fear of drowning. And it was like a fish or something, which just struck me as so silly. But that's not my story. That's someone else's story.
But those are the types of stories that you get. And I guess the reason I asked you is there one story that either the first time it happened or one of the more interesting ones that you could pinpoint?
Honestly, S&P, I certainly try to do everything for, the safety and welfare of children, but I honestly can't think of an S&P note
mishap.
I don't think I have stories, but I don't think that's one.
Well, let me bring it to here. What was the hardest for you to get into the kind of format of
the most challenging format?
No, because when you're in a show that's already established, you have to kind of replicate the show's voice and the cadence. Was there a show that it kind of took you a while to get into the vernacular or the type of
You mean
writing?
like an existing show where I had to, adapt to?
Yeah, like if the show's already running and you've got to write just a script or two.
Oh, sure. I mean, that comes up all the time. I think I've always said this, having story edited many writers over the years, as well as written scripts for other story editors. It's one thing to be talented and experienced and, to get an assignment based on that. But on top of that, you have to what I call, quote, get the show, and every show is different. There's different genres. There's action adventure. There's comedy. There's, preschool, which has certain constraints as versus writing for older kids. But older kids, it has to be edgy and there's a higher level of comedy. So every show is challenging. I'm trying to think of something specific. For example, I wrote a couple scripts for Doc McStuffins, which was a well-established show and a wonderful show. And it had very high standards, like the writing, the comedy level was so high, and the writers who were staff on the show were so talented and so experienced. So you just want to try to rise to their level. Another show where the writing standard was so high was Between the Lions for PBS.
Oh, yeah.
And some of those scripts, the scripts that I read, like the samples to try to, get the voice of the show, were brilliantly
fun. Chris and Norman are just visionaries.
Oh, totally. And some of the staff writers, too. I can't remember.
Peter Hirsch.
Yes, exactly. Like the scripts were just so tight, so funny, so well structured. The character voices were so clear that it just kind of, if anything, it makes you nervous. Like, oh, my God, am I good enough to write for this show?
It's like an imposter syndrome kind of
totally
thing.
And I think I did all right. I mean,
I watched your episode the other day.
Oh, thank you very much. I actually won my first Emmy for writing on Between the Lions, but I owe that mainly to Norman Stiles, who was the head writer, and the entire writing staff. I just feel grateful they gave me the opportunity.
And correct me if I'm wrong. When you're writing for that show, aren't you in Chris Surf's house? I
have been to Chris Surf's house. He has this amazing brownstone on the east side.
I've heard stories about the writers meeting up at Chris Surf's house to
I actually once went to a meeting. I don't think it was for Between the Lions. I think it was for some music show.
Lomax, probably.
Yes, and I think it was like the early days before it was on. Like it was just like a development meeting, and there was a whole bunch of writers sitting around a table. And I think it was like the ground floor of his house. And it was a very large room, and you could see straight through to the back where there was a backyard. It was, by Manhattan standards, it was enormous. And by any standards, it was still a very big house.
One of the kindest souls is Chris Surf. I haven't met Norman yet, but I've got to connect with Norman at some point too. But to your point, that is such a specific show because it's not Sesame Street. It's a little older. It's got specific goals that need to be met, but it's also this variety show, SNL sort of approach. But it's not in the magazine format style like Sesame. So it's like, how long did it take you, do you think, before you finally crack the code?
Oh, who knows? I whatever time they gave me, that's the time, whatever the assignment was, which is your outline is due a week from today or 2 weeks from today. And the good thing about television writing is it's broken down into steps. You write a premise, then you write an outline, then you might rewrite the outline, then you write a first draft script, second draft script. So at every stage, you get the support of the people who are on staff at the show and who know the show. And depending on the show, for example, Doc McStuffins with Chris Nee, no writer goes into it all alone. Like they have, this was the early days of Skype. So, they were out in LA and I'm in New York. But we would have a story meeting to break the story together. I think first you had to pitch a story. And then if they like your idea, then you would have a meeting with Chris and her staff writers to break the story down into a 3-act structure. So you knew where the act breaks were. So, you definitely got tons of support from people who knew the show really well. And then you take your best shot, and then you get a lot of notes, and then you try to absorb those notes. So, whatever the time frame was, probably 8 to 12 weeks is typical, I think, to write an 11-minute script. So somewhere in that range.
The reason why I brought up that question is because some of these shows that you worked on, they aren't the typical kid show premise. Like, for example, Out of the Box. That's such a unique kind of just idea in itself. The idea of imaginative play and all these things. And you can't get away with something that you would get away with on even Gullah, for instance. So just adapting to those styles.
Yeah, that's one of the most important things of, longevity in your career is being able to write across a variety of genres, write for different age levels, write, animation writing is very different from live action. And it's if you want to keep working, you have to kind of absorb things quickly and make it your own. So, I one of the things I'm proudest of is that I've been able to do that, because it's so challenging, especially when a show is well established. But, sometimes, my job, if I'm writing scripts for an existing show, is to absorb that show and write something in the vein of that show. But sometimes I've been hired because the show isn't working, like it's either at the development stage before it's been sold, or it's even been on the air for a while, but there were issues, or whether it was, the previous story editor didn't work out for some reason, or the show was going in some direction and the network executive wanted it to go in a different direction. So sometimes my job is not to get the show, but my job is to fix the show or, take it in a new direction. So that's a whole separate set of challenges.
Yeah.
And some of it is developing a show and setting that show. It's one thing to have an idea about what the show could be, but then once you start production and you get into writing scripts, then you have to actually execute, like, what does it mean to make this show? And, every show is different.
Now, I don't want to make any assumptions because, it's your life and your journey, but I can't help but imagine that ghostwriter specifically means the world to you.
100%. I would say of all, it was my first kids TV show, and they, for some crazy reason, I'd written Nancy Drew Mysteries, and it was a mystery series, and I had written some spec television scripts. I'd written a soap script. I'd been an assistant on a soap, and I'd written a spec sitcom script. But for some reason, with that limited experience, they hired me to be co-head writer with Kermit Frazier, who was a very experienced television writer, although I had the kids background and he had the primetime television background. But it was the very first show I ever worked on as a writer and story editor. And it's still my favorite show to this day. And I've done so many series since then and written for probably hundreds of different series, if you add up just scripts I've written for other people's shows. And I love the fact that it was live action. I love the fact that it was for tweens. I love the fact that even though it had a magical element, we were writing about real kids.
Really? Yeah.
A very diverse group of kids. And it was just fun writing mysteries and having the freedom to, imagine so many different scenarios, and we had a long run. We had 3 seasons. I think we had 75 half hours altogether. Although many of our stories were 4-episode arcs, with cliffhangers.
Yeah.
But, just first of all, it was my first show, and I'm so grateful to Miranda Barry and Liz Nealon who gave me the opportunity. Secondly, those stories were so much fun to write. I loved everything about it. And, I'm still very close to people from the show, even to this day, many, many decades later. So you are quite correct.
I know, because it still resonates with a lot of people. And even though it predates me by a couple years, I had older sisters. So I was exposed to it. And what I loved about it was it had this mystery element, of course, and all these things. But it also brought the MTV generation to like the tween age group. Like with all the music, there was some music.
Oh, literally. Like Liz Nealon, our executive producer, had come from MTV. that had been her previous job, I believe. And you may want to interview her and talk about, how she put the whole show together, because the development had been done before I got there. I think DJ McHale wrote the pilot, but she's the one who put the whole team together and conceptualized it. But anyway, because of her connections, we had like a lot of famous artists, like Salt and Pepper was on one of our episodes.
Yep.
And I'm trying to remember some of the famous people, lots of famous musical artists.
And one of your songwriters, she passed on, but
Gail Sky
she was
King.
brilliant.
So good.
Worked
So
on Goa
good.
too. I love her.
So talented.
We were in touch for a long time, but we never got to chat. I was just amazing.
I wrote the, I don't know if you remember this arc, but it was called Don't Stop the Music.
Yeah.
And Lenny writes a song, and a music, label wants to do a music video. So, or she has to write a song. I think like the music exec saw Lenny perform at the middle school talent show and thought she had a lot of talent. So Lenny had to write a song, and then she and her friends got to be in a music video. But someone was trying to sabotage the shooting of the video. And, like I said, I grew up in entertainment, so I know, what a shaky career it is. And one of the lessons Lenny learns is, yes, it was an incredible opportunity, but she can't count on things always, working out. And one of the characters in the story is a former pop star whose career then kind of went south, and he's working on the crew of the show. And we had this scene at the very end where a lot of famous musical artists of the time, like this is the early 90s, were there at the big like launch party for Lenny's video. But, one of the points was, things maybe work out, things may be good now, but you can't always count on things continuing in that vein. You have to constantly reinvent yourself, and the music industry and entertainment in general is a very unstable profession. But anyway, so we had a lot of famous musical artists in the party scene. I think Liz just called her contacts at MTV, and they sent over like all these famous singers.
I love Ghostwriter, and I'm so happy to shed some light on it for sure. It is so well loved. One of the things that I've always been interested in is pilots that get made. There's a couple episodes picked up, and then they fade away into the ether. And you worked on Gullah Island a lot, but one of the things you also worked on was the spin-off series.
Yes, Binya Binya.
Can we talk a little bit about that? Because
sure,
where was that within the series run? Like, what are your memories of this coming into your...
Well, let's see. I did not develop Gullah Island or create it. That was Kathy Minton and Maria Perez and Kaz Hyman. And Kaz had worked for Kermit and me on Ghostwriter. He was our staff writer, very talented. And then he went on to develop and launch Gullah Island. And at a certain point, I believe he moved on to other
projects. He was doing Jet Jackson at the time.
And Taina. And he was doing these projects with Maria, I believe. But anyway, so then I think Kermit became the head writer of the show. But I got to write scripts for the show, and I was very grateful because at the time I had only done live action tween on Ghostwriter, and this was a preschool show. And I guess the producers, when Kaz floated my name, said, well, she's never done preschool. And Kaz, I'm very grateful to you because he said, I think she can do it. He took a chance on me and fortunately worked out. So I wrote a few scripts like for season 1 or 2. Then I wrote a few more scripts for the next season. And then they offered me the head writer job in the final season. And I also wrote a bunch of scripts, in that season as well. I forgot what the question was now, but where in it all was Binya Binya. So I think I was done with Gullah Gullah and they were talking about doing this spin-off Binya Binya. I think I wrote a couple scripts, but it was only in order for 5, I believe, and I only wrote 2 of them. And I think I did some development on it, but I don't know, for whatever reason, they didn't pick it up for more.
This might be a hard question because you're kind of like picking children. I'm not going to do that to you because 1, you have your own children, and 2, it's just hard. But is there a script of yours that, because of content or the way it came out, that you're the most proudest of, that you go back to and you're like, you know what? I really like that script.
That's a really good question. Well, there's one I did for Harold in the Purple Crayon, which was on HBO Family before it was HBO Max, before it was Max, before it was HBO Max again. And I wrote an episode called I Remember Goldie, where his goldfish dies. And, you know,
Yes.
that show was, you know, like the books. A little boy falls asleep with his purple crayon, and he kind of envisions different scenarios and draws himself in and out of different situations. And in this particular episode, his goldfish, Goldie, had just died, and he's processing grief. The structure of it was kind of a loose structure, but it was kind of processing the loss of, you know, a beloved pet. And, you know, I think that one had some meaning to it. I also wrote an episode for Todd World, where one of the characters, Stella, was kind of a spoiled girl, and she had lots and lots of shoes and lots of everything. And it was wintertime, and there was a centipede who didn't have many shoes. It had a lot of bare feet, and it was very cold. And all the different kids on the show, on the, you know, kid characters were trying to collect shoes, and Stella was asked to give up some of her shoes, but she was, you know, very, you know, protective of her stuff. But she finally decided to give the centipede one pair of shoes that didn't fit her anymore anyway, and that she didn't even like. And when she saw the relief that it brought to the centipede, it made her feel so good that she gave it all of her shoes, because she realized there was something that feels better than, see, I'm getting choked up. You know, the bringing joy to somebody else or making someone else feel better feels better than having a lot of stuff. So I think that one might be
the troll episode of Gullah that you wrote. That's such a fun, kind of whimsical approach to the series. I love that one.
Wasn't that one inspired by Rumpelstiltskin?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it in such a long time, but I do remember writing that episode. I'm curious what, you know, why that one stood out for you.
Because I was always interested in, like, you know, acting and kind of getting into, and there was this kind of like this, let's put on a play in the backyard kind of approach. And it was so interesting to me as a young kid.
Yeah, you know, I've always been a kid. Like, as a kid, I always wanted to put on a show. And as an adult, I still want to put on a show. So that one probably came from the heart.
I mean, not to mention the guy that directed that episode is someone who I adore, the great Chuck Vinson, who I...
Oh, sure. Yes. I worked with him on a lot of things, I think.
Chuck is a big kid. That's just him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah. And yeah, I wanted to tell you that episode really made an impact on me.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why the show is so successful. And first of all, it's a very interesting culture with all kinds of, you know, musical elements and visual elements. And, you know, I got to, you know, they did like little segments that were just going into the Gullah Island and featuring people who live there. And there was a ranger, like a park ranger.
Yeah.
Did episodes, or, you know, he appeared in some of the episodes. You know, it's a very interesting culture, and nobody was really paying attention to it until they brought it to Nickelodeon. You know, I look back now and realize, like, I'm so glad I got to work in children's television in the years that I have, because now I think there's not as much opportunity. There's kind of a glut of content out there, as well as a retrenchment by networks at the moment. So much content was created when everyone jumped into streaming and everybody spent a lot of money. And then then I think a lot of people didn't recoup the money. And now, we went from 3 broadcast networks and then 3 cable networks to about 10 networks altogether with broadcast plus streaming plus cable. And now we're kind of down to 2 at the moment. I imagine things will loosen up again at some point because it's all cyclical, but I don't think there are as many opportunities to create content in the first place at the moment. And I also think the budgets are more limited. I don't think at the moment we're going to be able to do the same kind of thing, hopefully in the future.
I'm going to name somebody in the children's entertainment sector that you and I both know and see if you could share a story or a memory.
Okay, I'll try.
All right. Let's start off easy. Kaz Hyman.
Oh, Kaz. Okay. This is a good story. Kaz is one of the most talented writers I've ever had the pleasure to work with. And he was our staff writer on Ghostwriter. So it's really just Kermit, Kaz, and myself. And then we did have some freelance writers, including Alexi Young, who later went on to do the show Friends.
Wow.
Heard of that? And she's had like a huge career in Hollywood, and she was a very talented writer. But anyway, so Kaz had written a script, and this is back before everybody was writing and editing on their computers. So we would print the scripts out, and I would use a red pen to put notes on it. And I forget which script it was, but it was a brilliant script because Kaz wrote it. Therefore, it was an excellent, excellent script. But I still must have put a lot of notes in the margins. And that must have frustrated him because he said to me, Carin, you're the best friend a red pen ever had. Because I think I gave him too many notes.
You know what? I can hear it.
But it was so funny. I just remember that to this day.
I love that because that's the way Kaz talks.
Yep.
All right. Not to make it sad in here, but Janice Burgess.
Oh, she's so talented. And I loved working with her. Well, first of all, she had the office right next door to mine when Kermit and I shared an office on Ghostwriter. And she was literally next door working on 321 content. And first of all, I just thought she was such a cool person, like her sense of style, like she had cool glasses and the way she put her clothes together, it was just like, where did you get that? Where can I get that? Just thinking she was a super cool person. In terms of story, goodness. I worked with her across many stages of my career. So, we were kind of office neighbors at Children's Television Workshop. And then she became, we had the show, but whenever you do a show at Children's Television Workshop or a show for PBS, the show is only part of a bigger project. There's like educational outreach, and there's merchandise and toys and games and, so the bigger project, the research and all this stuff. So Tina Peel was our project director, and Janice became the associate project director. So I just remember thinking how smart she was and how stylish. And then she moved over to Nickelodeon. She went to Nick Jr. and created Backyardigans, and kindly, brought me in to write some scripts for that show, as well as Bubble Guppies. So I also remember her as a very talented, network executive, so I worked with her in different relationships through different jobs. But mostly I just really admired her because she was so smart and cool. Like cool is the word I would.
I don't know where in the timeline this person fits, but he's such a great, but also crazy individual. The wonderful Chris Gifford.
Oh, yes. So he, let's see. I did Ghostwriter for PBS. Then I did Gullah Gullah Island. Then I did Allegra's Window. And when I worked on Allegra's Window for Nick Jr., he was the network executive. And so, I just remember he was kind and funny and fun to be around and really friendly and gave good notes. And so we worked together on Allegra's Window. And then he brought me over to the Webulous World of Dr. Seuss. Yeah. And I ended up just writing one episode because then I got another job and I didn't have time to do more. But and then I also worked with him. I developed a project for Curious Pictures, which was an animation studio here in New York, called Marco Polo, which was for Nick Jr. And it was while he was the network exec while we were developing Marco Polo, and it was a stop motion animated show. But he at the time was also developing another preschool show, which maybe rings a bell, called Dora the Explorer with Eric Weiner.
Oh yeah, that one?
So it's, most people never heard of it.
Yeah, it only lasted a season.
But anyway, so he was both the executive on our project, but he was also developing this other project. And I think they could only pick one. And I think what happened, I may get this wrong, but I think this is the lore of Dora, that some higher up person at Nickelodeon brought a VHS tape home of Dora, and their kid absolutely loved it. And that was how they picked it to be the project to move forward. And we know that was now a total failure. Why did they do that? That didn't work out. But anyway, he's just a really lovely fellow, a very good human being.
Very quirky, but we love him for it.
And I didn't realize this because, the show that he had been on as an actor was a kid show after I was no longer a kid. But he was an actor on the show The Great Space Coaster.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know that about him.
Another person in your universe is the wonderful Brown Johnson, who I've never had the privilege of meeting. But what she did for children's television and really understanding the viewer, it hasn't gone unnoticed, and it can't be matched. So are there any memories of Brown? Or
she was like the head of Nick Jr. when I did Gullah Gullah Island and Allegra's Window. So I remember her as a, very tall, very attractive woman with short brown hair and, like in a suit, like she was, the top person at the network. So I certainly knew who she was. And I'm sure, I think she knows who I am too. And we, I'm sure we chatted, when she would come to the studio to visit periodically. And, we would chat briefly. And then I know she moved over to the workshop, to Sesame Workshop, after a number of years at Nick Jr. We didn't have much in the way, like, it's not like we ever went out to lunch or anything, but I certainly remember her, as having the big job at Nickelodeon and guiding the ship really, really well, because we got to do all these great shows. Someone had to approve those. She had good taste.
Because one of my dearest friends, and I thought of another person to wrap this up because he's probably listening to this, knowing him, the wonderful Jim Jenkins.
Oh, yes. He's another person I'm grateful to. Like, I have a list, my gratitude list.
He and I talk at least maybe once a month, maybe a couple of days. Like, we're that close. Like, he's been a real advocate for what I do, so I want to know where he falls in that.
Well, first of all, please, next time you talk to him, please send him my very best regards. We're Facebook friends, so I, keep up a little bit, whenever he posts something. But so he's on my gratitude list. So it starts with Liz Nealon and Miranda Berry for giving me my start in children's television. And the next person on the list is Kaz Hyman for bringing me over to Nickelodeon and working on preschool shows. And the next person on my list is Jim Jenkins. So after I did Allegra's Window, he was the creator or one of the creators of Allegra's Window. And so I came in the last season as the head writer of the show. And we had a very good working relationship. He's just a classy, talented guy, very aspirational, very, very warm, very kind. And so we had a good experience working together on Allegra's Window. And I had retooled the show a little bit when I came in. And so while we were still working on that, I guess Disney must have put out a request for proposal because they were about to release the live action 101 Dalmatians, and they wanted to develop an animated series that was kind of a spin-off of the new Dalmatians movie. So Jim and David Campbell, his partner, must have pitched their, take on a 101 Dalmatians animated series to Disney. And I think it had been in development prior to that. And for whatever reason, Disney didn't want to go in that direction. So Jim had pitched a take, which Disney liked, and then they needed to develop it. And I think they had been given 2.5 years to develop the show before it had to air at a certain, it was a drop dead air date. And the first 1.5 years of development went by and ended up not being the direction they wanted to go in. So there was only a year left when they okayed Jim's take for Dalmatians. So we had a year to do 65 half-hour episodes. Now, I'm sure you know from your many conversations with people in the industry, 65 half hours in a year is a ridiculously large number of episodes. Like now I'd be grateful if anyone had 65 episodes, I would, say, sure, I'll do it in 3 months if that's what you need. Because the orders now are so small, with streaming. But anyway, so Jim brought me on to develop the show with him and, oversee the writing of the show. I had never so much as written an animated script before. Like my agent couldn't even get me a script writing assignment on an animated show because I had never written I'd only done live action at that point. But Jim took a chance on me, and I ended up, developing and writing the show Bible, with and for Jim. And then story editing, I had to start story editing. And it was such a huge amount of work. It was it was the hardest job I've ever had in terms of just the volume of material that had to be created. But throughout it all, Jim was a class act, a pleasure to work with, very warm and kind, and also very humble. He had just sold his company to Disney and had made a lot of money. And he still remained just, kind, low key, humble, and super talented. And I got my first couple of Emmy nominations off of that show. So I'm grateful that he decided, even though I had never even written an animated script, to put me in charge of the writing of an animated series, like a very high profile series. And thanks to him, I've worked in animation ever since. That was now going on 30 years ago. So I'm very grateful to him, but also just think he's a very, he's a good person.
And Jim, if you're listening, this is where your head gets bigger and it can even... Yeah. But a couple quick questions to wrap up. Is there a show, either years back or currently on the air, that you look at and you see, I wish I could write for this, or this show is so good.
Lots of shows. The first show I ever tried to write for, and I pitched some ideas, and I think I even got a meeting off it, but, I never got an assignment, was Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Oh, yeah.
It was like an early live action show. So I just remember wanting to work for that show and trying, but I didn't get, an assignment. Let's see. I think Odd Squad, anything Adam Peltzman works on is brilliant and hilarious.
Tim McKeown is just bonkers. So Tim and Adam combined are like, whoa.
I never met Tim. I did work with Adam on Bubble Guppies and what was that other Nick Jr. show? Oh, Backyardigans. As well as he worked on a show that I story edited, Octonauts for Disney Junior. But I know Tim has tons to do with it as well. I just have never met him or talked to him.
Just another insightful.
Such a good show, so funny. I mean, there's a difference between wanting to work on a show and could you work on that show? I don't know.
There's another show that Apple spearheaded that Tim created that I loved, and Adam did some stuff on it too. Helpsters.
Oh, yes. I've never actually seen Helpsters.
I love Helpsters. It's so self-aware, it knows what it's doing. The writing is so good. Check it out when you get a minute.
I will.
It is really great. So we've been hanging out for a little bit. So I want to know, do you have any questions for me about my work or what I do?
So I'll throw back some of the same questions you asked me. Like, what have been some of your most interesting interviews?
There's so many, but one of the ones that I got to speak with is the creator of How I Met Your Mother.
Wow.
And that was interesting because it's different writing for sitcom than, preschool and all these different type of things. The stuff that you've been doing recently, of course, it's about weather, but it has that diversity and inclusion and all that stuff baked into it as well.
Many of the shows I work on tend to be in that area. I don't know how or why, but I'm so happy. Yes, it's got a diverse cast, but as Al Roker said, the family is Black, but it's not about the fact that they're Black. They're a Black family that's interested in weather, and that's a universal, and as our theme song, and this line came out of the pilot script that I wrote, whatever the weather, we're in it together. Weather affects all of us. And, we all share a planet, and it's good to understand weather, but also to understand what we can do to keep our planet healthy. And, and it's also about a family, it's about weather, and, there's definitely a weather curriculum. And I've learned so much working on the show. And I think kids will never look at a rain cloud the same way again once they understand what it's really made of.
And before we go, I need to just tell you what I watched right before we got on here, and it's Quarantine.
Oh, thank you for watching. Oh, I would love if people to drive to that.
We need to talk about that because that is so special and so unique, and wonderful job to everyone involved.
Thank you so much. That was a true labor of love. And I'll just say for your listeners, Quarantine the Musical on YouTube. You can watch it for free. I'd love to get more eyeballs on it. It's a musical I made during COVID when everyone was locked in their house. But because everyone was locked in their house and there's nothing going on, we got Broadway stars, Grammy winners. The woman who Shelley Paikin, who wrote the song "What a Girl Wants" and "I'm a Bitch," and also "I'm Only Human on the Inside." She and her husband Adam Gorgoni wrote our opening theme song and our ending song. And actually, speaking of ghostwriter, I don't know if you recognized Welly Yang.
I did.
And his whole entire family was in it. What we did was we hired musical theater performers and their children to play families. And then they shot, they filmed each other inside their homes while we directed them over Zoom, because everyone was locked in their homes. And, it was really fun to make, and I'm really proud of how it turned out. It's available on YouTube. You can watch the 2-minute trailer, as well as the film in its entirety on YouTube. Quarantine the Musical. Thank you for tuning in.
It made me smile the whole time.
Thank you so much for watching that. It really was one of my favorite things to ever have.
You can really tell, but seriously, thank you so much for joining me today. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me, Bob. It was so much fun talking to you.